But it's not over. It's not over if the underlying reasons for these conflicts are not addressed. A state of Palestine and a state of Israel would live side by side. And in that context, Hamas and other militant groups would disband, would disarm, because there would be a political solution.
Jeffrey Sachs just revealed that Israel's next move in Gaza after the ceasefire ends will be horrifying. Why this ceasefire hasn't established peace, what this means for U.S. foreign policy and the Trump administration, and how this pertains to Iran, because Netanyahu still has his sights on regime change there. So let's take a look. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
Professor Sachs, is Israel preparing to invade Iran?
Yes.
And will the United States greenlight it yet again?
Yes. You know, look, to this moment,
I guess I could ask you one more question and you'll say
sure.
Yes. Is Israel honoring the ceasefire?
No, of course not. Israel is killing dozens of Palestinians in Gaza, and it is killing and tormenting Palestinians in the West Bank. It is absolutely not honoring the ceasefire. It is blocking aid. Today, the International Court of Justice declared that Israel has an absolute obligation under international law to allow the United Nations to provide urgent emergency relief. And the Israeli government immediately declared that it did not respect the International Court of Justice and would not abide by the ICJ ruling. Israel is in a complete state of lawlessness, and the United States backs that. The ceasefire basically is not a ceasefire. It's not going to hold, and there is no peace plan. What we were discussing about Ukraine applies to the Israeli genocide in Gaza as well.
Yeah, he's right. The base, general interests of the Palestinians haven't been met. The base interests of the Israelis haven't been met as far as the government's concerned. They want ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians. They've already killed over 100,000. That's not good enough. You have Smotrich talking about how there's going to be settlements in Gaza. That's what they need. The ceasefire seems to have been a ruse. It's a temporary reprieve to some extent of the fighting to get the hostages back, take off some of the domestic pressures on both Netanyahu and Trump, and just resume the genocide. How can you say otherwise? Israel's already killed about 100 people since this ceasefire began, and they've admitted to constraining aid. In fact, under the ceasefire terms that were signed by Israel on October 9th, I believe, they were supposed to allow 600 trucks into Gaza. Instead, they only allowed 300, and then they suppressed it further when they said, hey, the Palestinians are slow rolling the return of dead remains, of human remains. So we're going to punish the Palestinian people. It just shows you where the war is. Sachs is right. He's been consistent on this. This won't end the fighting because there's no long-term solution in the ceasefire whatsoever.
Which is that Trump wants the fighting to stop. I think he wants the fighting to stop in Ukraine. I think he wants the fighting to stop in Gaza. But he does not understand the politics, and he does not understand root causes, and he doesn't understand how actually to end these wars. And he's surrounded by war profiteers who want the wars to continue.
Yeah, at all costs, the Lockheed Martins and Raytheons and Boeings and Northrop Grummans of the world, certainly so. If you're going to say that Trump wants this to end, both in Ukraine and in Gaza, you can't say that above all other considerations, because what he wants more is to keep the money flowing into AIPAC, keep the money flowing into the military-industrial complex and the profiteers, as Sachs mentioned. So if you want to say that, maybe he would escape some criticism, even amongst his base in some regard, but he doesn't want that more than he does want to placate the Israel lobby of the military-industrial complex. And by the way, the banks that finance it all off of our debt, off of public debt.
And ultimately prevail in the White House. So what we're seeing in Israel is the same as what we're seeing in Ukraine. Every time there is the idea that there is an end to this fighting, you have to ask the question, well, does that end address the underlying causes of this conflict? The answer with the Trump administration is never, because to address the underlying causes means to delve into the politics. It means actually to make some decisions, not just some grandstanding. Trump wants the accolades of the fighting to stop so he can say, you see what I've done. But to make the fighting stop, you have to understand the war, where it came from, what causes it, why it continues, and how to use politics and diplomacy to end the war.
Absolutely right. And that's the same regardless of theater, both in Ukraine and in Israel. That's the case. Trump isn't willing to do what it takes to end U.S. involvement in either. You could just theoretically pull all aid to Ukraine or all aid to Israel tomorrow. It's just pressures on Trump. Trump being surrounded by people like Marco Rubio and such, and ultimately not making the right decision when he has so many neocons in his ear. Mike Huckabee, too. And John Ratcliffe. These people are part of the same swamp that produced Mike Pompeo and John Bolton. What did you expect would happen when Miriam Adelson gets to essentially handpick your cabinet? That's what's going to happen.
That's not happening in either of these two wars. The so-called peace plan has no peace plan at all. It has a ceasefire, and then it has some fantasy of Trump sitting on some board of peace, but it doesn't address the core issue, which is that there's Israel ruling over 8 million Palestinian Arabs, in at best an apartheid state, but in fact in a state of lawless mass murder.
Yeah, it's mass murder. It's not even just an apartheid state. That's putting it lightly. It's a state of subjugation, a system within a system where the system overarching it all, the Israeli government, keeps those people in subjugation. They don't have the same rights as Israelis. Israelis block what goes into Gaza. They keep a chokehold on, entry and exit. There's a two-tiered jurisprudential system there. It's all absurd, and it's all because of the Israel first mentality that the U.S. doesn't put any constraints to. So he's right there. And he's also right, by the way, about the plan where Trump would be part of this board of peace with Tony Blair. He's much more concerned about economic redevelopment of Gaza than he is peace. Why? There's no attempt to create a Palestinian state to placate the Palestinians and their concerns whatsoever. Instead, there's just this ambiguous political horizon for peaceful and prosperous coexistence. You basically remove that point. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't give the Palestinians anything, essentially, but a reprieve to the fighting, which they're willing to accept because Israel's killed about 100,000 people, including about 20,000 children, many of which have been pulled out of the rubble that they called human shields, and that's how they justified the slaughter there. That's the truth. That's a sad truth. It's a truth I don't want my country connected to whatsoever.
Which is, of course, vastly worse. And nothing in the so-called peace plan got to the core issue. There needs to be a state of Palestine. This is what more than 180 countries of the United Nations, out of 193, are saying. What countries representing far more than 90% of the world's population are saying. But Trump, of course, doesn't hear, maybe doesn't understand, but in any event, salutes Marion Adelson, his gazillionaire funder and backer, who he saluted when he spoke to the Knesset in Israel.
And by the way, admitted that her loyalties lie more with Israel than the United States, or at least heavily implied that, by the way, and said it was because of the Adelsons that he moved the embassy to Jerusalem and recognized the Golan Heights, showing the amount of influence of the Israel lobby over his administration, practically boasting about it. Just think of that. Like, the optics of that, he just drops the mask, lets it slip. It's so absurd.
uh, he doesn't talk or even know or care about how to really end the conflict. And how to end the conflict, everyone else understands. The whole world says, yes, you want to end the conflict. You want disarmament of the militant groups. You want normalization of diplomatic relations. It's not complicated. There needs to be a state of Palestine uh, constituted of Gaza, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem, according to the internationally determined border, which is the border of the 4th of June, 1967. And then a state of Palestine and a state of Israel would live side by side. And in that context, Hamas and other militant groups would disband, would disarm, because there would be a political solution.
Yeah, I have to agree with this, and this has been the product of the Beirut summit and what the Arab nations in that vicinity agreed to in 2002. Broadly speaking, their agreement was that there'd be a Palestinian state and we'd normalize relations with Israel. We won't attack Israel. We won't fight Israel. The United States has paid off Jordan and Egypt to do that, but it hasn't paid off the other countries to do that. And, there are animosities between some Jordanians and some Egyptians toward Israel that still linger. But you wouldn't have to shovel so much money down the throats of these Arab nations if you give the Palestinians a state. And I'm not big on state solutions. I've talked about that a lot. But what I'm lesser high on is genocide solutions, because that's not a solution. That's not defensible whatsoever. The killing of innocents, and that's overwhelmingly the amount of people that have died in Gaza are innocents. Israel even admitted that through a leaked database. Glenn Greenwald covered this story some time back, showing that when you took statistically their lists of militants from Islamic Jihad and Hamas, the people they killed represented 83% innocents that didn't match the names that they had for those groups. So that's where we're sitting right now.
But just like we talked about in Ukraine, there's no politics in what Trump does. He wants the show to say the war stops, the magic wand, the ceasefire, it's over. But it's not over. It's not over if the underlying reasons for these conflicts are not addressed.
The last time Israel attacked Iran, Prime Minister Netanyahu went begging to President Trump to call everything off because the Iranians had hit Israel so hard. Do you think Iran would stop this time, or would cause serious and almost irreparable damage to the Israeli state?
I think that the chance of a devastating escalation is very real. What we saw in that so-called 12-day war is that Iran can penetrate Israel's air defenses. Israel has layered air defenses, but Iran has hypersonic missiles, and it has the capacity to evade and penetrate Israel's layered air defenses.
Yeah, I agree with them. The threat of escalation is huge, but it's on the part of Israel and the United States, if you ask me, just like it was during the 12-day war, when it was clear Iran didn't want war with the United States and Israel. They didn't try to wipe Israel off the map, as all the Zionists and neocons promised that they did. They didn't have bloodlust in their eyes trying to kill as many Americans in the region, in Qatar and other places in the Arabian Peninsula. Not at all. They even tipped off the president to their reprisal attack just to give cover, to their people, showing that, hey, they tried to fight back. They won that propaganda victory. Their regime remains. They don't want a war with the United States and Israel. They know that means potential regime change, and the U.S. cannot afford to get drawn into a new regime change on behalf of the Israelis where you put American boots on the ground, because that's what they want. They don't want to put Israeli fighters on the ground. They want the U.S. to take all the casualties, just like the U.S. did in Syria and Libya and Iraq. That's exactly what they want. It's part of the clean break strategy.
If it targets vulnerable targets in Israel of high significance to Israel, the results would be devastating. for Israel. And Iran could do that if it is attacked again. There's also the not small issue of Iran's highly enriched uranium, which would not require a major effort from where that stands now to become the fissile material for several atomic bombs. It would not take a lot of time or a lot of centrifuge effort to bring that stockpile that exists to weapons grade. And if Iran were attacked again, who knows which hardline factions in Iran would say enough is enough. We're not going to abide by these religious decrees that have said no nuclear weapons, and the commitments of the Iranian government to negotiate an end to the nuclear program with international supervision, but in a context in which the United States and Israel are not attacking Iran. Who knows what would happen? So I think war gets out of control. In a nuclear age, war can lead to global annihilation.
It sure can, and the U.S. government and the Israeli government sure haven't learned that lesson. And look, I think Sachs is largely right. The ceasefire, has served as, again, a temporary reprieve of sorts. There has been deaths of about 100 Palestinians since, and constraints of aid, but there have been hostages exchanged. That's a good thing on both sides. And I know I'm not allowed to call the Palestinian hostages that, but that's what I'm saying, because I don't believe that there's a real difference, except for the fact that Israel had so many more Palestinian hostages than Hamas had, by the way, by thousands. And you don't hear about that in the legacy media. But I do think this fighting's going to resume. I don't want to say it. I hope I'm so wrong about that, but it does seem like the genocide will continue. And in the midst of this is the discussion of attacking Iran, the most senseless thing. Iran, who poses no threat to the United States, with Israel wanting to suck us back into that. Netanyahu has been emphatic about that, talking about, bringing up this propaganda, the same tried and true propaganda he always did, that Iran, could put New York City, Boston, Washington, or Miami under their atomic guns. In this interview with neocon superstar #1 Ben Shapiro, indistinguishable from Netanyahu and his interests in every single way. And it's just so ironic. He's saying Iran can blackmail any American city. Just think of that. Think of the irony behind that. Well, Israel can blackmail one American city, and that's Washington, D.C. And that's true of both parties that reside in Washington, D.C. So yeah, that's what we have to deal with here when Iran is still in the mix of Israel's targets. Israel's attacked 7 different neighboring countries since October 7th. It's just not a normal thing. It's too bizarre. And the hypocrisy of, cheering America first while seeing how this policy manifests, it's just too glaring and too striking to too many Americans. Too many Americans are picking up on this, and that's a good thing. I have hope in that. The loss of support for Israel, it's palpable. There was a major poll showing a 50-point swing, 50% of the American populace from in regard to sympathies toward Israel from October 7th to just a few weeks ago. And think about that. That would never happen for any other issue. Think about a 50% swing in abortion over 2 years. It just would never happen. 50% swing in terms of, economics and whether or not to have free trade or total protectionism. Think of a 50-point swing. It just would never happen in any other issue. It just shows you where the American people are drifting on this, and it's not on the side of Israel first, thankfully, despite what the government does. But I do want to hear from you. Is Sachs right? Will this ceasefire still lead to peace? Will Iran be attacked again? Will it happen before Christmas or this year? Let me know in the comments down below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to Andrew Napolitano. If you like this video, please consider becoming a YouTube member. You can do that by clicking the join button below. If you do that, you'll get access to all my videos before they go live to the general public on my channel. And if you want a free copy of my book, Compact of the Republic, click on the link in the description below. Free of charge, no charge whatsoever, no obligation. All it is my first book that I published talking about why America's political system should be more decentralized. And that was a better vision for America, which has been transformed into a centralized empire. And that's to our detriment. But until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.